Chapter 2, what is the M&A process and why is preparation so critical? I look over at my phone and I see it's a client I haven't talked to in years. I am so not excited about picking up the phone, but I want to see what's up. Hey, how are you doing? I haven't talked to you in a while. Sure enough, they're calling me because they're ready for a sale. I had worked with them many years before when they were initially setting up their company. Our team helped prepare some of their basic corporate documents to incorporate the company in Delaware, documents for a Series A preferred stock offering, and documents for an equity incentive plan and restricted stock because they really wanted their company to be employee-owned. In my last conversation with this client, they told me that they thought someone on our team was over-lawyering the deal by focusing too much on the details, and the costs were getting too high. Like many entrepreneurs, they want things to be simple and easy, and they didn't see the importance of dotting every I and crossing every T with every sentence in these documents. As a startup, they're also on a limited budget. So the client tells me she has a good friend and co-founder who's a lawyer and she'll just take things over from there and wrap everything up. I'd been a bit anxious about that, but it was the client's decision. And I'm so grateful that they are calling me now as they begin the M&A process, because I could go in and see what had been done and clean up anything that needed to be cleaned up before the deal actually got underway. The M&A process can start at any time in a company's history. Oftentimes, it starts when a client decides to sell or even may receive a letter of intent out of the blue. This particular client is calling me because they had decided to go to market and they're ready to engage an investment banker to start the sales process. Some clients use an investment banker or broker to connect them with a potential buyer. A banker or broker is an expert in preparing and telling your company's story in a manner that will be appealing to buyers. They can also help market the company to sometimes hundreds of potential buyers, prepare what is known as the data room, which serves as the repository for every single document that you have and that the buyer is going to want to review. Data rooms are all electronic these days, and I'll provide more information about that in the other chapters of this Grass Class series. The difference between an investment banker and a broker is that investment bankers work on transactions really over $10 million, and brokers work on smaller deals. They also help negotiate all of the economic aspects of the transaction and help you make sure that you get to closing. These bankers or brokers usually take a fee of around 5% of the purchase price, and in my personal opinion, they definitely earn it. They are more than able to cover that fee by negotiating the highest price possible and help you ensure that you get to the closing table and you don't waste a lot of time in preparation on a deal that doesn't go through. Other clients may decide to sell on their own. For example, some clients call me and they say, hey, I met a competitor at a trade show and they've reached out to me and presented an offer I'm happy with. As a result, they don't want to spend that 5% on a banker or broker, and they don't want to spend time marketing their company to others. In that case, the legal and financial teams for the client will handle all of the aspects of the transaction. Once you have a buyer, the buyer will present you with what's known as a letter of intent. This letter of intent, or LOI, sets forth the basic terms of the deal, such as purchase price, how it will be structured, any conditions to closing the deal, and other critical economic and legal terms. Do not sign the LOI as is. You are about to embark on a very time-intensive and, if you're not prepared, exhausting process. You must have all the material terms agreed to before that process starts. Your negotiating power is at its peak before an LOI is signed. I can tell you from nearly 3 decades of M&A experience that if you don't get the most critical terms into your LOI before signing it, it is highly unlikely that you are going to be able to negotiate favorable terms later on in the process unless you're willing to walk away from the deal altogether. Sophisticated M&A attorneys know what's market for the deal terms, and they can help you negotiate to ensure that you get top dollar, reduce the likelihood of personal liability, and increase the chances that you will close the deal at the price you expect and not have the buyer come after you after closing demanding some of that money back. And yes, that does happen in actually about 25% of deals. There are entrepreneurs who have sold their business for millions and walked away thinking, I'm in the free and clear. However, all M&A agreements have provisions that allow the buyers to come back after the sellers for at least a year or 2 after closing to recoup any losses that may have occurred due to a breach of the representations and warranties that a seller makes. Trust me when I tell you that the last thing that you want to have happen is to sell your company and be lying on a beach in the Bahamas when you get a phone call from your buyer saying, hey, something popped up and you're liable to me for damages. Don't let that happen to you. As a member of the American Bar Association Merger and Acquisition Committee, I have access to market data that tells me how often which terms are agreed to in deals, as well as access to the highest quality transaction documents prepared by the best lawyers in the world. Make sure that whoever you work with on your sale has specific M&A expertise, because it will translate into real dollars in your pocket at the end of the day. Do not use your neighbor down the street that also practices personal injury or medical malpractice or real estate. It will not turn out well for you. So, back to my client who's recently reconnected with me. She knew that my expertise would be a huge asset for her now that she was ready to sell. She thought they were ready. She thought they were well organized. She thought they were well prepared. But when her buyer presented her with a contract to buy her company, and she and her team started going through that contract and putting the data room together, she quickly realized the importance of all those details that we had warned her about before. After a letter of intent is signed and the buyer has time to conduct its initial review of the data room, they will present you with a full definitive agreement for the purchase. This agreement has what is known as representations and warranties about every single aspect of your business. For example, you will have a representation and warranty that you complied with all laws. If you haven't, as a lot of smaller companies don't necessarily do, you may not be able to make that representation on the front end, and you could risk losing that buyer altogether. If you make any false representation, even unintentionally, and the buyer discovers it after closing, and there are damages, then they will have the right to come back after you for not only the money that they paid, but any damages that they sustain as a result of that inaccuracy. For that client who was a bit green, pun intended, on the front end about needing to have high quality, solid legal documents, we discovered that they had indeed made many mistakes in issuing stock to all their employees, among other things. Fortunately, we were able to clean that up for them, but it cost them about $50,000 extra on the back end versus what would have been a $5,000 investment on the front end. It also ended up delaying their closing for 6 weeks, and it put the entire deal at risk for possible inability to get regulatory approval of the cleanup work we had to do. Thankfully, the deal ended up closing successfully. The client made millions and is now one of our biggest fans who shares her story on Denver Startup Week and with other entrepreneurs who are unaware of how critical all those nitty-gritty details can be. So, how do you ensure that you are ready, that you've tackled all the nitty-gritty details and can get top dollar for your company? It's all about the 3 key strategies I mentioned earlier in my introduction: people, paper, and profits. We'll start with people.